Thank you, Marwan, and thank you everyone for attending. I'm Kevin Elder. I lead our research team here at Food Processing Skills Canada, and I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague Tracy Bernacki-Duza, who is our senior project manager, and she runs our regular webinar series called Speaking Food. So if you're interested in those, there's past episodes that you can find, but the focus for today is on the research that we did around the impact of US tariffs. And here with us to speak about that is Pat Beauchamp. Pat is the VP Primary Research in Intelligence and Technology at Hill and Knowlton, and he brings more than 30 years of experience doing quantitative, qualitative, public, private, and governmental research to the table, and we're pleased to have his insights with us today. So thank you very much, Pat. Take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here to share these survey results. I hope you'll find them interesting. Certainly, the issues are timely, and ultimately, I hope that you'll find this information useful for your work. So without further ado, why don't we get into it? I'm just going to share screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover. I'll get into the methodology on the next slide. It was a survey of 1,500 grocery shoppers. What we're going to look at is starting off with some inflation revisited. So we've been tracking. When I say tracking, I mean over time. So we have a little bit of time series on how people are perceiving inflation. We'll look at that. Then we'll look at some more tracking around food safety and quality. And there's some positive change here that we're going to see. So that's good. Then we start getting into this whole tariff by Canadian issue. We're going to start with looking at awareness and concern among Canadian shoppers. Then we get into changes, so sort of broad general changes and what is behind those changes. Then we get into buy Canadian, so asking people, are you buying more? Are you buying the same? And what is driving that? Why are you doing that? What are the barriers? What is preventing you from doing it or preventing you from buying Canadian even more than you are now? And then we're going to end with what we call label literacy, which is probably my favorite part, but you might find these results surprising. That's what we will end with. All right. What did we do? As I mentioned, it's a survey of 1,500 grocery shoppers. If you don't buy groceries either with someone or by yourself, which is not a lot of people, but you were excluded. So it's grocery shoppers. Almost 96% of the surveys done in Canada, it's online. So self-completed online with a sample that we obtained from Leger. We always use Leger. I think they're the best as far as sample is concerned. And we just completed this. So these are the field dates. We were able to do it quickly, design it quickly, and get it to you fairly quickly as well. So I'm happy about that. We did it March 17 to March 20th. So let's get into the results. Let's look at grocery inflation, and we're also going to look at quality and safety. So there's a lot of red here, but I guess that's apropos. So some of these questions we're asking people whether they agree or disagree or neither or don't know with a statement. And this is one of these questions. Here is the statement. I think food inflation is slowing down. This 10% is the proportion that agreed, said 4 or 5 on a 5-point scale. It's not a lot of people. If we go back in time, when inflation was higher in October 2023, inflation was close to 4%, I think, around 4%. And then we asked the same question just this past November. It was improving, and now it's back down to 10%. And I'm thinking, well, with all of this, talk of tariffs and so on, I mean, half the time you hear the word tariff, you hear the word inflation. So I think it makes sense whether people are literally looking at prices and deducing, yes, there's inflation, or just it's the environment that we live in. We're expecting inflation, but this number is what it is, only 10%. think it's slowing down. That's important context. This is looking at inflation from a bit of a different perspective, different question. This is something that we've also asked in the past. Over the past 12 months, would you say the price of groceries has increased, decreased, or stayed about the same? And people have a choice between saying increased a lot, increased a little. The 92 is the proportion of Canadian grocery shoppers that have said a little or a lot. So pretty much everybody says it's increased at least a little. If we break it down to the a lot part, you see here increased a lot. That's the proportion of that 92. 61 said a lot. Pretty much the same as in 2024, but it's improved. I guess we can use the word improved. Perceptions have improved a little since 2023, when things, arguably were almost at their worst. Okay, so there's some improvement, but not a whole lot. If we go on the right side, we're asking people, well, how much do you? So those that said yes, I think the prices have increased, which was almost everybody. That's what your number is down here, your 1,500 and your 1,374. We said, well, how much? How much would you say? So let's go down here. So 11 to 20% or more than 20%, those are big increases. Back in 2023, that was about 63% saying that. It dropped a little bit, and then it's pretty much stayed at that level. So the upshot of this is inflation is still something that's being perceived. It's something that people feel that they're seeing and feeling. So that's an important part of the context. This is also tracking over time. It's also an agree-disagree statement. So asking people whether they agree or disagree with each of these three statements using a 5-point scale, but it's not about inflation. It is about these things. So I think this is one of the more interesting findings. I trust the food sold in Canadian grocery stores. Back in October 2023, it was 63%. And I remember when I saw that, I checked it, and I'm like, that seems, that's kind of low. It's sort of, and then in 2024, but it was 63. In 2024, it improved a little bit. I'm like, okay, that's good. Now it's 76, just a few months later. So one might speculate, so what's driving that? I would say that what's driving it is this atmosphere that we find ourselves in with Canada sort of under threat, the tariffs, the insults, the national pride, the revival of nationalism, all of that stuff. Maybe now when people are saying, I trust the food sold in grocery stores, yeah, I do. I think that's probably what's driving it. This is one that we added. This was Kevin Elder's idea, which is a good one. Canada has higher food safety standards than the US. 63% agree with that. We didn't ask that before, 63. That's good. That's a lot of people. And that's important to having people feel comfortable or wanting to buy more made in Canada products. They already believe, most of them, that Canada has higher food safety standards. That's good. Then we've got this little one here, a little bit of a change. I generally buy whichever product is offering the best price, and brand rarely matters. It was 55 agreeing with that. It's dipped a little bit. I would think, and we'll see a little bit later, like next, that price is becoming less important because people want to buy Canadian, right? So it's like the priorities are shifting a little bit. And I think that is a small indication of that. There are bigger indications in a few minutes. Okay, so look at this image. Now we're working our way towards the tariffs. Let's check your video. Oops. I need to check something. Oops. Oh. Is that working? Okay, is that working?
We can still see your screen, but your camera is just blank, so we can't. It's just black right now. We can't see you, but that's all right. I think we can keep going, and we'll.
It's okay. Yeah,
know
you
you're
can
there.
keep going, Pat.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
We can see the slides. Yeah.
Oh well, that's all that matters.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All righty. Awareness and concern regarding U.S. tariffs and more, trade rhetoric. What do we mean by rhetoric? I'll show you. Okay, so we asked people if they've heard about the talk of tariffs. It was a longer question than that, and people had a choice between saying, yeah, I've heard about it a lot, or I've heard about it a little. This is a little and a lot. Almost everybody has heard at least something about it, 98%. Maybe that's not surprising to you, but I've been doing this a long time. You don't see 98s in survey. It's like, I've never seen that before. You don't even see 90s, right? Like 88 would be a lot. So this is really quite something. Everyone's aware of this. On the other side, are people concerned about the way we phrased it was tariffs and trade restrictions, 85%. That's another really high number. Normally, when people are really concerned about something, like let's say, for example, we were to ask about healthcare or crime, those are usually at the top of the list. You'd see about 60, 62%, something like that. It's 85% here. Now we get into Canada as the 51st state. So that's sort of the rhetoric part that we were talking about. Have people heard about that? That's that same number, 98%. And then the concern on this side, this is again on a 5-point scale, and you've got 62% saying, yeah, I'm concerned, 4 or 5 on a 5-point scale. So that's normally a high level of concern, but compared to this is unusual. So people are concerned. No questions. This is another Kevin question. So we thought we should ask about this. It's a two-parter. The first part is, please indicate how integrated you believe the Canadian and American economies were. So what was the situation that we were all living under? How integrated? At 62% saying completely or mostly integrated. Then we shift and say, okay, now thinking of the future, how integrated do you believe the Canadian and American economies should be? And it drops by about half. It goes from 62 to about 31. So that's exactly half. So that gives us some context. Recent changes in Canadian grocery shopping habits. Now we're getting into these changes. So we started broadly with how much would you say your grocery shopping habits, including the purchase of alcohol, I'm going to specify that, have changed over the past 2 months. This is just in the past 2 months. The survey again started in March 17th. So thinking back the 2 months before, 43% are reporting a lot of change, 4 or 5 on the 5-point scale. That's a lot of change. Then we said, well, what's becoming more important or less important, actually, that was also a choice, or the same level, in your decision making in grocery shopping. And we've asked this type of question before, and the ones that come out on top are always saving money and maintaining or improving one's overall health. But we added these 3 just because of the context that we find ourselves in, and these 3 dominate. So these used to be the most important ones, and now we've got buying Canadian products, 81%, not buying US, because there is a difference, 76%, and then buying products from my province. I put a circle around it so that I would remember to tell you that this is much higher in Quebec. It's like 84, I think. Poll time. So here's our first interactive part. There's 2 of them. We'd like you to guess at the results that we're going to show you. So there's 2. They're on the next slide. So Kevin's going to, I can't see the screen, so he's got the poll question there for you. And we asked people whether they were buying more, fewer, but the same amount of Canadian products. And they could say a little more or a lot more, but what we're going to show is just more consolidated. And then we asked about the permanence of change, and their choices were, I think the change is going to be permanent, or I'll do it as long as I can afford it, or until these issues between Canada and the US are resolved. And this question was just asked of those who said that they're buying more Canadian products. So I'll wait till Kevin.
Yeah, the responses are coming in now, fast and furious. So we'll just we'll give it a few more seconds and see how we did as an audience in engaging the correct answer. So, hey, there we go. So for question 1 about how many people, what percentage answered more, the number one response was 76 to 99%, which was 54% of our attendees said that. And then for the percent about whether they expect it to be a permanent change, the top answer was 51 to 75%, which was 44% of the attendees. But the next highest was 36%, which was the one above that, 76% to 99%. So the bulk of people expected a lot of permanent change.
Well, you might be a little bit disappointed then. Let's see what we have. All right. The short answer is 67. So this is the same question, same 2 questions. Here are the results. So 67% of the 1,500 Canadian grocery shoppers said, hey, you guys buying more, but the same, or maybe even fewer. 67% said more. So that's a little lower than I think you were expecting. Is the change permanent or not? Basically, 41% said they expect this change to be permanent, and that's more likely to be seniors. Seniors are also more upset about this, like more emotional. And I've seen that in other research too. Now, what are Canadians buying more of? That was a follow-up question. So if you said I'm buying more, you were given these choices and you could select all that apply. And this means that, for example, 34% at the bottom said they're buying more Canadian alcoholic beverages and so on. So the one at the top, which, surprising, I guess, in winter is produce. So produce stands out, and then maybe beverages stand out at the bottom, and then you've got pretty much the rest in the middle. Now, this was another Kevin question. It's a good one too. We asked about, where people are shopping. So we're talking about what they're buying, of course, because that's more important to us. But it might also be interesting to know if they're making changes to where they're buying. So here's the question. Have you changed where you shop for groceries away from US-based retailers like Walmart and Costco towards Canadian retailers such as Loblaw, Sobeys, Maxis in Quebec? And we've got about 50%, about half, saying, yeah, I'm going to more, Canadian stores. And then you got 30% saying, nah, I'm still going to Walmart as much as I ever did. And then you've got a few, 17% that say, well, I never went to those US stores anyway. So this indicates a pretty significant shift. Drivers and barriers. So what's driving people to buy more Canadian? So notice the sample base, it's 1,000, it's not 1,500, because only the people that are buying more Canadian got this question. So they were given these choices, and then they could pick other. Not a lot of people picked other, which means I guess they're good categories. What do we have? So it's a combination of emotion and sort of self-interested pragmatism, if you will. So the pragmatism is number one, and they could select all that applied. It's good for the Canadian economy, number one. Number two is emotion, anger, frustration with the United States and or President Trump. Then we're back to pragmatism. I want to help Canadian food and beverage processors. Back to emotion, Canadian pride, and so on. Let's look at some of these at the bottom. Canadian products are less expensive. Not a lot of people think that. We'll get into that more in a minute. It's easy to tell which products are Canadian. It's not a big one, but we'll get into that as well. In terms of subgroup differences, generally speaking, in this whole survey, there's not a lot of subgroup differences. So by demographics, not much. But here, seniors are more likely to pick more of these. So they're more motivated, but they're just as likely to buy more Canadian. So they're kind of more emotional and engaged, but it's not translating yet into buying more product. That's what the survey suggests. Now the barriers, everybody got barriers, whether you shop, you buy more Canadian or you don't, because it's relevant. So if you buy more Canadian, you could be buying even more. And if you don't, well, you could be buying more. So everyone got that. Which of the following is discouraging you from buying more Canadian products when you grocery shop? And again, it's a select all. So let's just go to the first two. Canadian products are more expensive. That's a perception. It's too hard to tell which products are Canadian. So those are the top two. I forget to look for Canadian products. That's more likely to be younger people. And it's too hard to tell. So generally speaking, men have more trouble telling which products are Canadian, and younger people kind of forget to do it. Now, what is this 52% here? We asked those who were purchasing more Canadian products, either a little or a lot, that's 67, remember that. We asked, do you think it's making your grocery bill more expensive, less expensive, or the same? 52% think it's making their grocery bill more expensive. But the thing is that they were given a choice between a lot more or a little more. 48% of that 52 is a little more. So that's important to point out. So for the vast majority of people, it's like, yeah, buying Canadian, I think it's costing more, but it's a little more. Which leads us to this, which is a willingness to pay more for a Canadian product compared to a US alternative up here. So how much, if anything, would you be willing to pay for a comparable Canadian product? Everybody got this one. I'm not willing to pay anything more. It's 24% for all shoppers. It's only 14% among those who have started to purchase more Canadian products, which makes sense. And it's also good that it's only 14%. And then you've got how much are they willing to pay more? For most people, for a lot of people, it's under 10%, right? Up to 5%, 27%, 6 and 10, and then anything over 11%, you're not getting many takers, which probably makes sense. And then you've got, it depends on the products. Won't surprise you to find out that people with higher incomes, higher household incomes, are willing to pay more. So are seniors. Yes, the challenge of identifying the products. So remember, there's the two main barriers are identifying these things and then the cost, the perceived extra cost. So this is back to some tracking. We asked this in October, but it was relevant for us. So we asked it again because of the last item on this list. So the question is, how easy is it for you to determine the following when purchasing groceries? This is the proportion that say easy. And we can compare it to what it was in October 2023. Nothing much has changed until we get to the most relevant. So product price, yeah, that's easy. Freshness, fine. Product quality, a little harder to tell, but it's the same as in 2023. Where the product is grown, produced, 66 back then, 60 now. So that's what we consider, well, at least I would consider counterintuitive, which kind of means, that's a fancy way of saying it, it kind of doesn't make sense on the surface of it. Because one might think, well, you've got extra labels in the grocery store and, there is an effort to do this. So I'm surprised that it goes from 66 to 60, because that would be probably a statistically significant difference. What's up with that? And just based on my own experience, but I think it makes sense, is that people are trying to find the Canadian products. Back in October 2023, they're not going around sort of picking up bottles and going, see, let's look if this is Canadian. So there's probably a lot of people trying to do that, and they're coming to realize that maybe it's not as easy as they thought it would be. I think that's what's driving that. Men have more trouble. Identifying Canadian products. So we have like different ways of looking at this. So a different question: when shopping in grocery stores, how easy or difficult is it for you to get a sense of how Canadian a product is? So we just put it to people. And only 40% of everyone, so this is all 1,500, the whole sample, said that it was easy. 40%. I mean, 60 doesn't think it's easy. Now you might say, well, that includes people who aren't buying more Canadian products. So, maybe that number is actually higher among the people that are, but it's only 45%. So of those that have reported buying more Canadian products, only 45% are saying it's easy to find, to tell how Canadian a product is. What are people doing? This was a longer list, but didn't want to put too much on here. Which of the following actions, if any, have you taken to determine how Canadian a product is? Everyone got that. Read the label on the product. Relied on packaging, Canadian symbols, drops down quite a bit. Look for signs and displays, drops down quite a bit. Among people that have reported buying more Canadian, this is all higher. The app, I don't know if you've heard a lot about apps, we're hearing about that. Only 11% said that they've used these apps. Poll time. This is the label literacy. So we gave people a little knowledge test. Here it is. Imagine you're grocery shopping and want to purchase the most Canadian product based on the two logos below. Which one would you choose? So they could pick either one, or they could say they're both the same, or I don't know. So Kevin's going to put up the question, and the question is, what do you think they picked?
Yeah, how many people, what percentage of the respondents got it correct? So we've got the those two options there, and just to while you're doing that, we'll tell you that the correct answer of those two is product of Canada, which means 98% of the product inputs and everything is Canadian, whereas made in Canada is 52%. And so there is a difference in which is the most Canadian product. So of that, we're just looking for what percentage you think of the survey respondents got this question correct. And we've got just over half of the people coming in. So I think we can, we'll give it another few seconds, and then I think we can end the poll. All right. So what we've got right now is the top response is 26 to 50%, with 43% of people here on the webinar picking that as the option, and that is the correct option. So well done, everyone. So you can.
So here it is.
You can take down the poll now, Moran.
So Kevin, can you see the actual?
Yep, we can see that now, Pat.
Okay. So I was disappointed by this. So it's funny because in the first poll test, I thought you'd be impressed, but it looks like you're disappointed. This is the other way around a little bit. So only 47% pick product of Canada. Then you get 29 made in Canada, and the bunch saying they mean the same thing. Now, I just want to see something quick. Now, one might say, well, I bet you the people that are buying more Canadian products are much more likely to select the right one. Not really. It's like 60 or something, 58. It's not that much of a difference. Now, this is one of the last slides I have. I think it's the second last finding, I think. These are, again, with these agree, disagree statements, and then we have 3 results. This one, this 48 here, was asked of the people who told us earlier in the survey that they weren't buying more Canadian products in the last couple of months, okay? So then only they got this question. So 48% of them who are not buying more Canadian products say that they want to start doing so. So there's a whole group of people, millions of people, who said that they're willing to do so. Answered 4 or 5 on a 5-point scale. On the right side of the slide, everyone got these. And again, they're agree, disagree. So 70% agreed with, I'd buy a lot more Canadian products if it was easier to determine how Canadian a food or beverage product is, 70%. And then grocery retailers have done a good job at making it easier for me to determine how Canadian a food or beverage product. Only 48% think that. So that's part of the challenge. So here we go, implications and considerations. I don't want to spend too much time on this because you're probably in a better position than me now to discuss this. But what does this mean, to me, to us, to Kevin? What is the key finding? I think the key finding is pretty straightforward. Consumers are increasingly buying Canadian for emotional and pragmatic reasons. But there's significant untapped potential, which we just saw. There seems to be sort of money being left on the table, so to speak. There are barriers mainly around. It's still kind of difficult for people to determine what is Canadian. Enhanced opportunity. So I think what's interesting about this, because we've been doing this kind of research with Kevin and Jennifer and the gang for many years, and what we saw through COVID, and in this type of research, but in other kind of similar type research, is what I would call the permanence of change. How and we've all seen this in our own lives, how we made changes that we thought were going to be temporary, or we never really thought about it, and we've ended up making them permanent. I think the opportunity here, and there are some studies out there, including by Dalhousie, the food professor, that have studied the permanence of changes in behavior, including around eating and cooking and grocery shopping. And there's some evidence that a lot of this stuff can become permanent. The barriers we have talked about, perception that Canadian might be more expensive. I mean, it is what it is. And difficulty identifying Canadian products. Keys to success. This may seem sort of cliche, but I think it's true, because processors can only do so much. They have labels. The retailers are in charge of their shelves and what's in the stores. And then I think government has a big role to play in terms of maybe building awareness and getting the word out. So there we go. Just in terms of my little suggestions for your considerations, I just got three of these. So enhanced product labeling and shelf placement, it's what you might expect. So working with retailers to improve placement and signage, maybe whole shop Canadian sections. People are into this, so there's opportunities to do something. You could have a sale on just Canadian products, or put them all in one spot, or a group in one spot. One could improve those digital solutions, which apparently aren't being used much, but maybe the industry hasn't been too involved. It's just people doing it on their own. So maybe one could build a better one or something. Address the perception of higher costs. Maybe a couple of things. So remember at the beginning, there was this perception that Canada has higher quality, higher safety standards. Well, this is where this comes into play. So highlight the value proposition. So people already believe it's safer, better quality, and that there's economic benefits to doing so. So it's reinforcing things that they already believe, as opposed to maybe telling them, look, it's not more expensive. If it is, great, but you can tell them these things. Targeted promotions, we've already talked about that. And then finally, there may be some opportunities out there, sort of product gaps, where there are no Canadian products, and where people would, or you're close to developing a product and maybe you're hesitating, but now may be the time, if you could put out a Canadian product that is this and that may be of interest to people. And highlighting the unique qualities and ingredients of Canadian products, already something that people believe. So I am done. I'm going to do that and stop sharing screen.
Thank you, Pat. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining there. So now that we're done with the presentation portion, we can move into our Q&A. So we have a couple of questions in, but again, just as a friendly reminder, you could ask the questions into the chat and also submit them. This is the time for you guys. So any of your burning questions about the tariffs and the items discussed here, please feel free to submit those, and we'll get started. Um, okay, so we have the first question here that came in anonymously. So it reads, what did you find most interesting from the survey? And I assume it's gonna ask for your personal perspectives on it. So how about we start with Pat? What are your thoughts?
Probably three things come to mind. Um, One is the level of awareness. I mean, it's obvious to us maybe because we live this, but often you find that people are not aware of things. And here we see 98% awareness. I said it during the presentation. That's almost unheard of. So that's number one. Number two is I think the emotion felt by seniors stands out. Number three, I guess, disappointed might be the word, or surprised about the ability or inability of the people to select the logo that indicated that a product was more Canadian. So like that 98% one. I I remember when I first got the data, I kind of rushed to that one, and I'm like, I thought it'd be higher. So that's what stands out to me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Kevin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, it was the questions that we did the first poll for everyone in the webinar on, that we had 2/3 of the grocery shoppers that said they were buying more Canadian. And then of that, we had the 41% that was permanent, but then also 33%, which was as long as they could afford it. And as we heard in the other part of the survey, most of them felt it was making their grocery bill a little more expensive. But when you have those two groups together that plan to do it for as long as they can, up to permanence, that's 74%. And then the other option, about how long would you maintain this, was 21% for until the current situation is resolved. So depending on how you want to look at that, it could be up until 2029. And when you added them all together, that's 95% of 2/3 of the Canadian grocery shoppers that are planning on making this change, which is massive. That's over 60% of grocery shoppers across the country that are making these sort of changes, and that's going to have a lasting impact well into the future. And so I think that Pat was right at the end when he's talking about that there's an appetite from the consumers to find more Canadian products on the shelves and to find ways to reach them and give them what they want and really let them see those local impacts, whether that's in their own community, in their own province, or across the country, that their support for the industry is what they want to engage with. And so it's really a good time for everyone to really um, focus in on the Canadian market a little bit, as well as looking for other markets other than our southern neighbor.
Yeah. And I think even segueing to what Pat mentioned, this is really interesting how it touches on a lot of the multifactorial elements that affect this, whether it's the consumer intentions, the economy, kind of how things are going right now, obviously. But then there's the point of, well, okay, you have the intent of wanting to do these things with this purpose, but there's also the piece of the knowledge. How do we know if this product is actually made in Canada or produced in Canada? So it's a really interesting intersection of how those stats also appeared, at least from my angle. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. Um, any other points that you guys would like to add at all before I move on to the next question?
I think just for me, I'd found the whole thing really interesting. Just one, again, like Pat touched on it already, but just how strong the response was. And for me, the one that sets off alarm bells, I was talking about it with a graphic designer earlier in the morning because he was asking the same sort of questions. And I had said, the the one that is surprising, like that takes into account the whole trade rhetoric piece, is the bit about the 51st state. When I think if you had asked that question in a bubble in January without any of the tariff stuff or whatever, you would have had, oh yeah, I've heard that Trump said that thing. And then amount of people concerned by it would be almost zero because nobody would take it seriously. But with the fact that we have all of the tariffs and other actions that have actually gone into place and gone out of place, that to have almost 2/3 of respondents say they're concerned about the US annexing Canada, that's just wild to me. Like to me, that really shows the level that it's resonating with people. So
Yeah, and I'm just also from my side, from both of your perspective, this might be more of a perception thing, but do you guys see that as a disruption or as somewhat of a catalyst for like a new frontier for Canada based on these results so far?
Well, I kind of get back to the permanence of it. I don't think it's like a one and done. I mean, first of all, in listening to the coverage yesterday, all the pundits were saying like, get used to this. This is going to go on for possibly years. And so that's a lot of time for people to change their habits. So, it's easy for me to talk about investment because it's not my money, but it might be worth, investing, thinking that this is long term. And there could be a lot of new customers out there.
Yeah,
That's very true.
I'll add that we saw that with the shift about how integrated people believed we were in 2024. And so you had that 62% that thought we were mostly or completely integrated economies with the United States. And when we ask them what they want to see going forward, that is cut in half. And so the there's a definite appetite that I think there's a feeling amongst Canadians that trade with the US was free, open, fair, easy for a long time. And we ended up with a lot more eggs in that basket than we now realize wasn't prudent. And so I think going forward, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the level of integration that we had in 2024. I think it's going to be whether the companies are based in the Atlantic provinces or prairies or on the West Coast, people are looking to other markets and other free trade deals that Canada's set up with other parts of the world. I think we heard at Canada's Ag Day in February that Canada, of all of the G7 countries, has the most free trade deals with other countries in the world. So we have a lot of markets open to us that aren't the United States, and I think that for the businesses here and for the consumers that they're looking for Canada to diversify its trading partners so that we don't end up in a situation where one partner holds as much leverage over us as the US did.
Yeah, it's bringing a really good point for the future proofing of our economy and how all these things interact. So that's a very, very good point. Thank you for that. So we've gotten a couple of more questions here, and I'd like to ask this one because I think it touches on some of these details that we've already discussed. So this is also an anonymous question, and it reads, was there any income or age differences that are interesting? And I think that touches on a lot of the insights that we're speaking to in terms of economy and a lot of the projections or forecasts that we're looking at from immigration and other sources. So again,
Yeah.
the question was the income or age
Yeah.
differences that you guys think are interesting in that realm.
Well, generally speaking, in this data set, it's pretty even. There's not a lot of differences, but on age, in terms of who's buying more Canadian, that's pretty flat. So there's not much change by age. There's nothing statistically significant. But when you look at the enthusiasm or the emotion around it, it's higher among seniors, and seniors are willing to pay more. So they're more enthusiastic. Um, Younger people who find that um, they are forgetting, as young people might do, to look for Canadian products. So that stood out as statistically significant in terms of the barriers. And income, there wasn't a whole lot, except that people with higher household incomes are more willing to pay more for a Canadian product. So there's not tons of stuff. Like when you look at the crosstabs, the regions, you look, is there something? I often wish there were, and it's like it's not much. There was just Quebec, for example, that were thought it was much more important than in other places to buy products from their provinces.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for that insight. And just to add on to that, do you think there's any further implications or like minutia that differs between the generations, Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y? Are there any interesting pieces that came up on those distinctions?
On some of the differences, sometimes when there's differences, it's, let's say, just seniors or it's just the 18 to 24s. But on some of the ones where I said it was seniors more than young people, it's a straight line up. So
Oh,
the older you are, the more likely you are, if you know what I mean.
okay.
So
And
that's
Okay.
on the, yeah, that's on the emotion of it. and willingness to pay more, awareness, things like that.
Got it. And sorry, Kevin, you had a point there?
Yeah, I was just going to add in, we did a previous report looking at different generational differences across the board. And one of the things that stood out was that a big factor for Generation Z is they're valuing convenience. And so, as Pat mentioned in his recommendation piece at the end, that expanding the quality of those apps and the awareness that they exist is anything that we can do to tap into the people that want to buy Canadian but are struggling with it, to make it easier for them so it's convenient, so that it's not like, I think there was another question where 20% of respondents had said they don't want to disrupt or change their current grocery shopping habits. And so if we have things that make it seamless or easier for them to buy Canadian, whether it's a tick box and they're having their select Canadian alternatives to these products on my grocery app or something like that, that takes it away some of the barriers, that will really help make it easier for generations that really prioritize convenience of their shopping experience over some of the other factors that we've seen.
For sure.
Yeah. Can I just jump in quick? That
Please,
reminds me, the result where we ask people, how easy is it for you to tell a product price and quality? And then the one at the bottom was where a product is produced or made. And we had the result of 66% saying easy back in 2023 versus 60. It went backwards. And that's when I said it was counterintuitive. I think that's a big one. I think that is based on people making an effort, like, hey, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pick up the item and I'm going to look. And it's like, there's a flag on it. And then I'm going to look at another one, like down the aisle, and it says, well, made in Canada, product bottled in Canada. Like, I think that's what we're seeing, that it's probably harder than people thought. And they're coming to that realization because they're trying to do it.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the intent as well. And also, like, there'll be a very interesting piece here to discover in potential future surveys or future insights on this stuff. So, really exciting discussions to kind of frame forward for the data that we need to scope out here. But on that point, and forgive me for anybody answering these questions, they seem to flow very well with some of the topics that we're speaking. So, I'll be speaking to these questions a bit out of order. There is another anonymous question that came in here, and it says, what do you believe may be the challenge for the labeling and the Canadian consumer understanding? What do you think brands or retailers could do better to increase the understanding? So I think that's more of a perception question, but I think it'd be great to see some of the insights that you guys have. Pat, would you like to start?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to that product of Canada, made in Canada. And I found it disappointing because it's like, if you're going to go out with the intent of buying Canadian, it's like Google it a little bit, So, and like we see this in a lot of research where it's like people are only willing to do so much. It's like the intention is there, but it's got to be easy. And so it makes me think like it's not easy enough, or it could be easier, hopefully. And then we get into things like, I'm not a technical person. I'm not an expert in the food and beverage processing or anything, but I have been trying to look at these products and I look at these results, and it's things like standardization and having a legend in the grocery store. You walk in, this means that, the flag, or this means that, something that makes it easier for people, because they're not going to, some people will, they're going to sit there and they're going to do their research and they're going to understand it. But most will go in there with good intentions. And if it's too hard, they're just going to grab what they normally grab,
Yeah, that's very true. And it's really interesting how there is a bit of a disparity in terms of how that's taken. You might have someone completely boycotting Walmart, even though Walmart might carry Canadian products, but they'll go into a Farm Boy or let's say a Canadian producers, mom and pop shops, but they won't necessarily know what are the products. So what onus does that fall on? Is it the grocery retailer, or is it sort of like awareness campaigns that we can do to get people on board for that, especially with the gap that you're speaking to with the technology?
Well, like that was the point about the partnership, which, does sound cliche, but it's like everyone does have a role to play, because you've got the processors are in charge of the packaging. The grocery store are in charge of the shelves and displays and things like that. And then there's a role for government here for sure in terms of awareness and maybe helping with standardization, uh, funding an app. Who knows? Because right now the government is being expected and volunteering to do a lot of things to help out in a lot of ways with this tariff situation. So this is something that the government could get involved in, and it's not a sort of a necessarily like a bad news. We've got to try to make up for something. It's an opportunity, right? It's more of a positive story, which is helping Canadians buy Canadian. It's not like adding weeks to EI.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And Kevin, would you like to add
Yeah,
anything to that?
yeah, I'll just jump in that it's really like in Canada and the US are very integrated, and certainly for a lot of the large food and beverage manufacturers, like just I'll use cereal as an example. Most people eat breakfast cereal. That there'll be facilities for some of the major brands that manufacture breakfast cereal, and the same company will appear, they'll appear next to each other in the grocery store, but this box might be made in Ontario and that box might be made in Ohio. And they're different brands of the cereal because they say, oh, like I'll just make, I have no idea where the cereals are made, but like I know Shreddies are made in Canada, but so you say, oh, wait, these Shreddies are made in Canada, but this other Post cereal, they have a facility in the US and it gets imported into Canada. And so it's not necessarily even as easy as looking at going, oh, that company, I'm not going to buy like, and so it is a really big challenge, and there's difficulty in understanding how all the labels work, and a lot of them are voluntary. And so I think that
Yeah,
in terms of trying to get the message out about your product and how it works, and get the retailers on board too with what they're doing, because there's always a lot of confusion. I know there was an article on CBC about somebody getting confused about how there could be a made in Canada orange juice when we don't grow any oranges, and it was looking at how much labor goes into the juicing and all of that. Like, and so it's a complicated situation we've never really had to dive into, because as Pat mentioned, like we weren't even asking questions about some of the Canada US stuff before because it was a non-issue. It was just that in an integrated shopping experience where people buy the products they liked or the brand or focused on what was on special. But now there's this other factor, and people are asking questions and wanting to sort of untangle these cords that have been twisted into a knot. So that's really what part of what's making it complicated. And it's just whatever, I would say for individual employers, it's easier to focus on what they can do on their own label and try to get the word out about their product and how they want to market it, than
yeah,
rather than have another label change come directed by Health Canada or CFA or something like that, when there's been so much of that already. That I think just trying to make sure that if I had a product, I would want people to know like where it's made and what the Canadian content is in it, because I know that consumers are looking for that. So
yeah. That's a really good point to mention because it is really almost challenging the general or normalized consumer behavior that people do in grocery stores and in purchasing, whether it's Amazon, online, that's another factor too. But we're kind of changing the status quo and how people operate and think of these things. And it's almost like introducing a yellow tape to an experience that's supposed to be freeing. And, you go buy whatever you want, whatever your heart pleases. And now it's almost like shifting the perspective on it. And I think it's a true testament to the aspect of knowing is half the battle, right? So that's a really, really good point. And I'm also interested maybe how that applies in online perspectives, but I want to make sure I address the other questions here. So thank you, Kevin. Anything else you would like to add to that, Pat?
No.
All right, awesome. So we have another question here, and I think it actually relates to um, this. So there's a participant that's interested, and this is an anonymous attendee. So the message says, "Thank you for the great presentation. I'd be interested to know how similar the groups were between 2023 and 2024 survey participants and the 2025 participants. And did you find a specific population group more willing to participate?"
yeah, I can take that. I saw that
Yeah.
question come in, so I looked up
Sure.
the answer from the previous survey from November, and the respondent profile for that survey is almost identical to what we had in this one. And in terms of um, where there's more respondents, it's if of the categories that we look at. So we've got 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 45 to 54, or 35, 44, 45, 54, 55 to 64, and 65 plus. So 65 plus is a larger category than the other ones as well, but that's the largest. We have a quarter of our respondents are 65 plus, and that's that sort of breakdown. It's for 18 to 24, it's the lowest, it's around 10 or 11% each time, and then the other from basically from 25 to 64, each of those age breakdowns has about 16% of the respondents. So it's really quite consistent across the board. It's a sample each time. Pat, I don't know if you want to speak more to the sample.
I should say that. So the data is weighted. So meaning that we know, like, even though it's not general public, it's grocery shoppers, but very few people don't qualify. So what we do is that we use the same sample targets or sample quotas and same weighting scheme as we would for the general public. So we know, for example, that 51 or 52% of the population is women. So our sample is going to be 52% women. We know that 38% are from Ontario, so our sample is going to reflect that as well. So it's always the same.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, would you like to add anything on that? I have a segue question here, if not.
No, that's I said my piece.
Awesome. Sounds good. So there's another anonymous question here. And it reads, were there any regional differences, or was the response similar across the country? So I think it touches on the same piece that was asked before. So yeah, who would like to?
It was pretty uniform.
Okay.
So when you go through it, you're looking for things. You're sort of hoping for things, for little subplots, if you will. But this was all very consistent, except for that one question where it was how important when you're buying groceries are these things, and it was like buying Canadian, not buying U.S., saving money. And there was one that said, buying product from my province, and Quebec stands out as higher. Quebec and Alberta is actually a little lower, which I thought was unusual. But that's pretty much it. It's all pretty uniform.
All right. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Like, I'm really impressed at how uniform it was. Like, it's remarkable to me because when we did that generational survey, which the reports on our website is called Working Together. But one of the things that struck out was that we found that amongst the English respondents and French respondents of the survey for the generational one was that like Generation Z and baby boomers were more similar with each other in English and in French than any of the English and French respondents were. So the fact that this has really got a uniform message across the country and bridge, like there is a cultural difference between Anglophones and Francophones, that we're all responding to this the same way. Like that, to me, that's really remarkable.
It's awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And okay, final question here, I think. So this is also anonymous, and the question says, will you be replicating the survey? And what is the planned cadence to see where buying patterns may shift going forward?
That is a Kevin question.
Yeah, I can take that. So
Awesome.
we are planning to keep this going. So this was the third iteration that we've done of these consumer surveys to try to keep a finger on the pulse of the issues that matter to food and beverage manufacturers. And so we're not going to run this exact survey again, but we do carry over a lot of the questions to try to keep touching on it. And as Pat showed in his presentation, we brought some back that we hadn't asked in the November one into this one in March to do that. And it's the cadence has sort of been every 6 months-ish or so, but with this one, we ran with it right away because we knew it was important to get the pulse before the situation changed again on tariffs and really see what had happened. But that is the plan going forward, is to continue with these surveys about every 6 months so that we can let people know what's going on and what's changed, and really track how the behaviors have changed and see what happens. Because I think we all want to check in on this again in the fall and see, well, who knows what the situation will be then, but whether the people that answered the percent that we had said, oh yeah, this is a permanent change, whether that is borne out by the data or not. So yeah, we're definitely planning to continue with the consumer research and bringing that to all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And just one quick piece there. If you want to stay up to date on all of our stuff, like the consumer survey, you can feel free to sign up to our newsletter. Lots of exciting stuff coming up, Speaking Food and many other events. So yeah, definitely keep posted onto that. And yeah, I think that
Well, there's one more thing to add quickly
Go ahead.
was that just before the webinar started, if you hadn't seen already, the full report on the survey is available for download on our website in English and French.
Thank you, Kevin. And just on that point, now that we're kind of wrapping up, I can segue into this. So first off, thank you all for joining and for answering those wonderful questions. That was a beautiful discussion to be had. And I'd like to also extend the thanks to Kevin and Pat for joining today, as well as our FPSC team, all helping in the back end. So thank you all for that. And just to kind of wrap up, for anybody that did leave the call or was not able to attend for any reason, this call is recorded, will be sent to you via email where you can access it, as well as we will be sending some of these resources that Kevin was mentioning, like the consumer report and some other nice links that you can have via email as well. So stay posted for that. We will probably send that out by early next week at the latest. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'd just like to give some time from the rest of the team, and thank you all for joining us today. Okay.